The irony of his words made my stomach twist. I watched him move through our kitchen with the easy familiarity of someone who belonged there. 7 years of marriage had created these patterns. Where we kept the sugar, how he liked his coffee, the way he hummed along to the radio, even though he swore he didn't know the words. All of it was a sharp shard of pain in my chest. I loved every second of every day with him. Or at least I thought I did. Business class meant he wouldn't be at his usual gate, so I wasn't expecting to see him until later that evening. When I met his family at the airport restaurant in Terminal 8, they were already seated and waiting for me. I stopped dead in my tracks. In front of me was a table set for 5. There were 2 empty seats beside my sister, one at the head of the table, the other across from her. To my horror, the seat opposite mine was occupied by Chloe, my husband's assistant. We'd met a few times before, but only briefly. She was younger than me, mid-20s, all sharp angles and ambition. And she stared back at me with wide eyes, her mouth forming a silent O, but there was no apology in her gaze, no regret. I slid into the seat beside my sister without acknowledging Chloe. No one said a word as we waited for Aiden. I felt the familiar warmth of my sister's hand on my arm. It was her way of saying, "I've got you." But even her presence couldn't ease the cold dread spreading through me. The first time I met Aiden, he'd held court like a king surveying his domain, which really was his domain. Their house, his money, his rules. And I was just a girl from Vermont who'd somehow charmed her way into his life. Kyle knew this. She'd seen the look in his eyes when he spoke to me. It had been a mixture of amusement and assessment. She'd also noticed the way he looked at her. At the time, she'd joked that I must have brought my little sister along as bait. Little did she know. He arrived at the table like a man who owned the world, which he probably did. His tailored suit and perfectly knotted tie gave him an air of authority. His smile was disarming, that there was a glint in his eyes that suggested he wasn't entirely comfortable with the charade. As soon as he sat down, my sister leaned in, her eyes blazing. "He knows, doesn't he?" "What do you mean?" "He knows about us." My voice was barely a whisper. She shook her head, her lips pressed into a thin line. "No, he doesn't know." Not yet. The flight to Paris had been delayed, and by the time we got to the restaurant, it was almost noon. I ordered a glass of water, my hand still shaking from the shock of the morning. Over the next hour, I met the rest of his family, all smiles and pleasantries. They were lovely people, well-dressed, educated, sophisticated. They welcomed me into their midst with open arms. Then they left, one by one, to attend to their own lives, leaving me alone with Aiden at the table. We had a fight scheduled for that afternoon, and I was supposed to leave New York that night. So there wasn't much time left to waste. I needed answers. I needed the truth. But more than anything, I needed a miracle. The first rays of sunlight were filtering through the window when I finally spoke. "Where were you this morning? You weren't at home. You weren't at your office, and you weren't in your car." I hate being lied to. I don't want to feel like I have to constantly question everything. He took a sip of his espresso, savoring the taste, I imagined. It had been months since he'd bothered to look at me, let alone talk to me. So the fact that he was engaging in conversation at all was progress, I suppose. "Tell me the truth, Aiden. Where were you this morning?" His gaze never wavered, even as I stood up, my voice echoing in the cavernous space of the restaurant. "The charade is over. I don't want to be a fool anymore." I may not have been able to tolerate his lies, but I wasn't about to let him walk all over me either. I was done being the dutiful wife, the quiet observer. I wanted answers. And if he wasn't going to give them to me, then so be it. I turned to leave, my chin held high, when a hand on my arm made me freeze.